Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's episode of Hey Sister. Hey Sister, how you doing?
Hey, sister.
Hey, sister. I
Sister.
love it.
Yes, it's wonderful to be in the company of our sisters, right?
Yes,
Amen.
for sure.
So,
For sure.
sister, I know you had a big meeting yesterday, your first in-person
Yes,
cluster meeting as the Intermountain Cluster Coordinator.
yes.
Uh, how do you feel that you got that behind you?
I feel I'm very happy, very relieved that is done. My voice sounds a lot better today than it did yesterday, which I was like, I had to apologize. I was like, y'all, I'm sorry for this raggedy voice. I was just apologizing. But it turned out to be beautiful. And the ladies at Delta Beta Omega chapter and the undergraduates at Zeta Alpha chapter did a fantastic job. So I am very grateful for all their hard work. It turned out really, really nice.
Awesome. Well, let's clap it up. Let's clap it up for them. We are
Congrats.
super excited tonight to have our very special guest, Dr. Brooke Mobley, who's also one of our sorority sisters. So,
Yeah.
welcome, sister. We have a few people watching, one of our super fans. Hey, Jody. She says,
Hey,
hey, sisters
Jody.
and Dr. Brooke. All love, Mr. Mustangs 29. Hey,
Hey,
who is Mr.
Mr.
Mustangs?
Mustang.
I don't know, Mr. Mustangs. Let's we gotta check that one. And then Jody says, Christina, that hair is fire. All right.
Thanks, Jody.
Do a number for 'em. Like do a little swirl.
Girl, you know how to shake your hair.
Girl, no, I'll get whiplash in here. So,
Well, as in typical Hey Sister fashion, we ask that you like, follow, share, and subscribe. We come to you live on Sundays on the Facebook and YouTube platforms. You also can find us on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and tune into those episodes that you may have missed. Go back, listen. There's going to be something that's going to be said tonight that you're going to want to go back and hear in the replay. We also want you to join the conversation in the comments. That's where all the action happens in the comments. So get active in the comments with us tonight. In typical Hey Sister fashion, we start off with hot topics. Now, this is a hot topic for all of us to talk about. It's election season, y'all. And girl, you in trouble if you don't get out there and vote. Dr. Brooke, have you voted already?
Early voting. I'm voting next week on Monday.
Okay, all right. What about you, sister, over there in Arizona?
I have my ballot right here. So I'm going to complete it and drop it off so that I am accounted for early on.
That's right.
Even though they are trying to attack our ability to have mail in ballots and early voting in this state, because we still have folks running who are pushing the big lie.
Mm-hmm. All right. We got Jody says she's dropping the ballot off tomorrow. I dropped my ballot off on this Saturday. I looked at it from top to bottom, front to back. There are a couple of amendments. So this is a midterm year. You need to look for the amendments in your area. There was county commissioners on the ballot. There were whether or not we renew the terms of some of these appellate judges on the ballot in addition to governor and senator. You need to take a careful look at what's on the ballot, front to back, top to bottom, because there's so many things that impact your daily life on that ballot. So go ahead. We got someone else saying I'm voting tomorrow, and I'll probably drop my off on election day. As long as you have a plan to vote and get it done, we want to go ahead and get it done.
Yeah.
Now, we were having a little conversation. This was not a planned hot topic, but this might be a little bit of a hot topic because it relates to what we're going to talk about tonight. Tonight, we're going to be talking about surviving domestic violence, and October is Domestic Violence and Breast Cancer Awareness Month. And we were talking about the artist, Fabulous, the rap artist Fabulous, but we also started talking a little bit in this pre show about Nick Cannon had expecting three more babies this year.
Oh, girl, no. Wait. I'm trying to catch up. I
Oh,
thought
you didn't know that, sister?
I did
Yep.
not. I had pulled it up to try to see, but I thought it just said in
At
October.
the end of the day, I feel like the children are who misses out, because I don't care how much money you have. I have one child. I do it by myself. And it's hard to get all of her events in. It's hard for me to get off work and volunteer for Fall Festival, which I do every year, or to chaperone class trips as one person. To have more children than days of the week, I don't care how much money you have, you cannot physically show up and be at every basketball game, Girl Scout meeting. What if 2 high school graduations are on the same day? These kids are all across the country. I feel like it is unfair to the children. They all deserve a certain amount of attention from their parents, both of them, if possible. And there will be no excuse for him other than he doesn't have enough time in the day, month, year, lifetime to physically support all of these children.
Mhm.
Well, and I guess my question is why? Because at some point this is not about the children. This is about your own selfishness, right? You cannot convince me that you're having this number of children with this many different women because at one point I really did believe, okay, his mortality has been a big deal for him. I know that at one point he was hospitalized. I think he had lupus and he was on the verge of death. And so I figured, okay, mortality is an issue for him. Maybe this is why he had 1 or 2 more. But now that we're in these double digits with almost as many mothers, I just don't understand what the motivation is. And look, I know that there are people who believe in polyamory or who believe in.
But even with polyamory, even if you are a traditional married couple who necessarily don't believe in birth control and you have 12 kids, even in polyamory, if that's what you're into, a lot of times y'all live and raise your children together. He is not living or raising these children together. They are all in separate households.
Yeah, very good.
Across the country. Right.
Yeah.
It's not like on the show Big Love where they all share one backyard.
And I'll be honest with you, I wrestled with my own mortality. I am in remission from an autoimmune disease. I was on chemotherapy in medical school. And it made me think if I wanted to have children at all, because I didn't want to die young and leave my children mourning. I did have a child and I'm glad that I did. It was one of the best, if not the best decision I ever made. But I think when you wrestle with mortality, everybody, is affected differently, but you think about the people you leave behind. So now you're leaving behind 15 to 20, if he keep going, children, if you really think you're going to have a lower mortality to now grieve the loss of their father.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I'd be interested, just is that a form of abuse?
I think it's negligent. I don't know if I could define it abuse, but I think it's negligent on the part of the children as far as the emotional and physical needs of a child, because it's a lot. It's a lot with one. It's a lot.
Yeah,
absolutely. It is. Well, we're not going to answer all those questions today, that's for sure. But we want to get into surviving domestic violence. And so we see your Dr. Brooke Mobley, MBA. So we know you highly educated, sister, right? But let's jump into
degrees.
Yeah, you got a few degrees. You're smart, you cute, all of that stuff, right? And girl. So let's talk about how did you find yourself in a situation or circumstance of being victim to domestic violence?
So when people hear what my upcoming book is about and my organization Purple Tears, a lot of people are in awe because I to them am not the epitome of a victim. I've always been strong-willed, stubborn, some may say. I've always been highly and independently motivated. I've always known what I wanted for my life, even as a young child. Like people from middle school are like, we knew you was going to be a doctor. You put it in our 8th grade yearbook. I always fought for myself. And growing up in Philadelphia, that could have numerous meanings. But I also had abandonment issues that I found out about later in life. When I was going through it, I did not understand why I was attracted to men who were insecure, or men who had issues with indulging in alcohol and it changing their personalities, or men who had mother issues. I didn't realize that that was my go-to until I had therapy. But I realized that I was dating men like my biological father. And the things that I was finding myself in were the situations I watched my mother go through. And so I found myself with people who loved me almost in a controlling way. But because I had felt abandoned by my biological father, I liked that attention. I liked feeling that somebody loved me enough to want it to be with me all the time, to want it to know where I was, to wanted to limit the contact that I had with male friends, because I'm a tomboy and I had a lot of male friends from middle school up until today. And I didn't understand that that wasn't love. Mm-hmm. It gave me the attention that I thought I wanted from my biological father. And it came in the form of my biological father. And unfortunately, I found myself in a situation that as a child, I wanted to help my mom get out of, and found myself in a place that I couldn't get out of it.
Mm-hmm. So you're talking about your mom, and as we prepare for the pre-show, we were talking about the generational cycle of abuse. So what did you witness growing up with your mom? And all of this is going to be in her book, and her book is launching next month. But what did you witness as a child from your mother, your father, and even you talked about your sister being in an abusive relationship as well?
A lot of times it always had to do with some kind of substance abuse. The majority of the time it was alcohol. But my biological father also battled with other substances that he is clean of now. And I think what me and my sister saw, we didn't want, but there's always something in you that is attracted to what you're used to. And I think she and I did that. And I will say that my mother and my sister tried as hard as they could to get me out of this situation as soon as it was apparent to them. And it might have been apparent to them before I knew it was apparent, because I thought I was a great actress. I thought I was fooling everybody, and I was in this great relationship that when people came to visit our home, he would cook these wonderful meals and he would host and be so nice and be so attentive to my friends and family. And he was a bit of a showboater, so he liked to show that he had financial stability, which we later found out he really did not. But it painted a picture to people, if they didn't know the consistent aspects of our relationship, that this was a wonderful man who loved me and supported me while I was in residency and I was broke, and showed me experiences that I might not have had if it wasn't for him. And so I think, as much as I didn't want what I saw, I was attracted to it, and I didn't know anything different. But I was lucky in that I have a stepfather who taught me what I wanted. I just got to find somebody like him.
Okay. All right. Sister, you have a question.
So obviously, Dr. Brooke, you're, again, a highly intelligent woman, and beautiful, all those things. You mentioned having relationships where you had a lot of guy friends. So you're one of the girls that guys don't mind hanging out with. What made you attracted to this specific person, and what were some of the early signs? You mentioned some of them, but what were some of the early signs that really, raised your red flags?
So at the time, he did give me attention that I needed, but I was in residency, so my time was very limited. But the time that I did have, he did put in effort. He would drive, cross state lines. If something bothered me. He would send roses to my job if I had a bad day. And as a resident in the hospital, getting flowers from a man, that was like, oh my gosh, like, who is this guy? He is so great. Would bring lunch for me and my co-residents over if we had like overnight call. But our time was limited because I was focused on residency, and that was truly my focus. And so the times we had together was a lot of times like honeymoon phase. So we would go on vacations and I would be first class. And we would stay at 4-star hotels. And it was things that I could not do for myself at that time, that I'll be honest that, late 20s was very intriguing to me. I had never been that girl who dated people because of their status. That wasn't who I was. And that's not who I am today either. But it was nice. It was different and it was nice. But it came with stipulations. So early signs where he was controlling, and he had an issue with numerous friendships that I had with men, and almost to the point where he wanted to meet them all and to gauge whether or not they were ever attracted to me, and wanted to divulge deep into our relationships. That did we have relationships in high school, college, medical school, so forth and so on. On vacations, he would indulge in alcohol. And I thought it was a vacation thing. Because I didn't drink a lot when I was studying and seeing patients, but when I traveled, or, I went back to New Orleans, because I used to do that often. I loved the city that I went to school in. I would drink. And so I thought it was a part of vacation, but then he would get angry and he would get into arguments that turned physical with other people. And a lot of times I was collateral damage because I'm trying to break it up. I'm trying to keep him from getting in trouble. And then the anger would be geared towards me. There were times where there were material goods that were abused, but not me necessarily. Collateral damage in that he might throw a lamp and it hit me. Or punch walls right by my head. And I would chalk it up to, he drank too much. Next time I'm going to try to limit his drinks, because he would be super apologetic and do some really grand gesture when I would talk to him again. Because it wasn't always right away that I would forgive, because we had distance between us. It wasn't until we lived in the same household that I literally feared for my life almost every day.
Well, you just dropped a lot of early signs for things for people to be looking out for, and it's just my mind is racing with all that you had to go through. And so, tell us more about how you survived. How were you able to survive? Because this is not just a 1-year thing. This was a long-term relationship. So tell us about the length of that relationship and how you were able to survive. Even though you saw these red flags, like you said, you were attracted to what you were missing or had craved from your biological father.
First and foremost, I survived because I had God. I am covered in the blood, regardless of how much I fall short. I know that. There were times when all I could do was pray. But I also had a great resource of family and friends who, even when I lied to them and they knew I was lying, they listened. If they really thought I was in harm's way, they would come. I was living in rural Florida, and I had a community in Lake City, church family and friends who would come and get me, knowing why I was calling them, but I would make up something, and they would come and get me. I remember one incident. I had a neighbor. She and I had become close, and she was an African American, and I was restricted from leaving my house from him, and I was notably pregnant. So I couldn't move as fast as I normally would. And there were times where I was attacked, and that Philly in me came out, and I fought back enough to get away or to stun him out of the rage he was in, because in the moment I thought it was life or death, and I had a human in my belly who I was protecting. It no longer became about me. It became about her. even in the womb. But I remember not being able to get out of the house. And I had a dog, and my dog jumped and hit the garage door opener. And I am literally running in rural Florida with no shoes on my feet, no bottoms, a t-shirt with this big old belly, screaming for somebody to open the door for me. And she didn't. She didn't open the door for me, and we lived 300 feet from each other. So the athlete in me just kept running until some high school students were making out in the back of their truck, cliche enough, because I lived in a cul-de-sac that people knew who I was because it was a small community, and they knew that it was very dark back there and they could get away with that kind of stuff. And they let me in their car, and I was able to call a friend who came and got me.
Sister?
So I'm just curious, because obviously we don't know why people have these issues or why they act out like this. But did he have a history of violence with other people in his life, like his family or mother or anybody else?
When I met him, I didn't think so. I didn't know. He used to paint a picture of being the victim a lot in a lot of his relationships, whether with family, lovers, or friends. But ironically, the first red flag should have been the night that we met. I was watching football, Chicago Bears versus the Eagles. Go Birds. And in the moment, I was a single resident in Maryland, living my best life with my other single friends. And we were getting attention at the bar. And it was a predominantly white bar, and I was getting attention from predominantly white people. At the time, I had red hair and they thought I looked like Rihanna. So I used that to my advantage, I guess. So a group of Black guys came in, and they were astonished at the attention we were getting. So they were like, we need to come over there and talk to them too. And we actually had an amazing conversation. My girls and I bought around, and the guys were impressed that the girls were also buying around the drinks. I don't know why that was impressive, but it was to them at the time. They, told us later. And it was the end of the night. And we were like, you know what, let's just all go to the next bar for the 8:00 game. So we were heading out. He wanted to go to the restroom. It was taking a long time. For me, it seemed like for a man to go to the restroom. And I hear somebody run out of the restroom and say, oh my God, call 911, call 911. And so the resident in me at the time kicked in. And I think I'm going into this male's bathroom to help somebody who maybe got too drunk and I'm passed out. But it was the guy I had been talking to at the bar who later became the person who I was in the relationship with. And somebody had hit him over the head with a bottle. And I thought, oh my God, they must have been racist. I made up all these stories in my head, but at the time it was just important to get him to 911, so forth and so on. And I think that's how he got my attention, because now I feel bad. So I'm checking on him and this kind of stuff. And it actually comes out later that the fight was over me. He was confronting these white guys because they continued to give me attention. And he confronted them as if me and him were in a relationship or something. I had just met him the same night. And I guess one thing happened to another and the guy hit him in the head with a bottle. But that should have been my red flag to run for the hills. But for some reason, I thought it was, oh, he took one for me. He must really like me, I guess. I don't know. I don't know what I was thinking at 26 years old. But that is actually how we met. It started with violence, right? And it ended with violence. So I would say for any young lady, if meeting someone is a very peculiar situation that you would not otherwise get yourself into, do not get into it. It is a sign. God is trying to tell you. He is giving you a warning that this is not a path you want to go down. Do not be hard-headed like me. I was telling them on the pre-show that I get asked the question, what would I do differently? And it's very difficult for me to answer that question because I want to say I would end it. I wouldn't start the relationship. I would have ended it earlier, so forth and so on. But I have an amazing 7-year-old daughter out of it. And I will go through it all over again 10 times if it means having her It just means that I probably would end a relationship probably at conception, but I would still have dealt with the abusive situations that I dealt with leading up to her conception and birth, because nothing would deter me from being her mom.
Yeah.
The best
Well,
parts that he had, if he had any, must live in that little girl.
yeah. Well, folks, you're tuned in live to Hey Sister. We are talking with Dr. Brooke Mobley, and she is telling us about her survival story. We want you to join the conversation in the comments. So I know that some of you are watching and have some questions. So make sure you type your questions in the comments so we can ask those to Dr. Brooke. But let's talk about how you got out. Like, how were you able to finally get out of this situation? Um, yeah, how did you get out? You survived.
I did.
So you survived.
I
So
am a
yes
survivor.
to surviving. And how did you get out?
So the ability to get out was always in me. It's always in you. You always have the ability to get out, regardless of people putting you in situations where you feel like you don't. They will isolate you from your friends and family so you don't have resources. They will attempt to bind you financially, making sure that they have access to your credit cards and your bank account and things of that nature. I was lucky in that anything that I owned was in my name and my name only. There were no access to my physical bank. He was on some of my credit cards because I was trying to help him with his credit because I had good credit, but it was limited access. And if anything was spent over a certain amount, I would know and get alerts because I was savvy and smart enough to have that going for myself. But new to Tampa, I moved to Tampa, Florida when my daughter was 4 days old. She is now just over the age of 1. And even though she was a baby, I could tell that she knew something was going on. I had gone out with a friend for the first time since having my child to dinner. And something in my gut said, go home, go home. So I cut the evening short and I went home. And I came home to a 1-year-old in a bathtub with the water clearly up to her chin. It was not scalding, but it was warmer than I would have ever ran for her. She still was partially clothed. And she looked terrified. And I have a water baby. She had been in toddler swimming classes. She was 6 months old. My daughter did not fear water. She does not to this day. But I saw fear in her eyes. And I didn't even attempt to look to see what kind of state he was in. At that time, I went into mommy mode and I got my daughter out that tub. I got her pajamas on, got her ready for bed. And then I went to address him and he literally passed out drunk on my bed. And it was at that point that I said, it's not about me. He could have killed her. And as much as I stayed, I no longer loved him. I no longer was intrigued or attracted to him, but I did not want to become another statistic. I did not want to become another African-American woman raising their child by herself, especially as a professional who had done everything right her whole life. I didn't want that stigma. I was trying to break that generational curse and found myself in a different generational curse. But at that time, it was no longer about society. It was no longer about what people would think about me. It was no longer about going to those doctor events and not having somebody on my arm and people asking why. It was about my child living or dying. And the next day, I contrived a whole plan overnight. In the morning time, I gave him whatever he wanted. And that meant sexual. I was very pleasant and loving and caring. And I followed him as he took my daughter to daycare. And as soon as her bottom hit the little preschool chair, I signed her out. And I reminded them that he was never on any paperwork to be able to pick her up. And they only allowed him to pick her up because they knew he were her dad and he would come with me. So they were illegally letting him pick her up and telling him information. And I reminded them he is not on the paperwork and that you can no longer do that. And she would not be coming back here. And I left and never to return again. It took me 45 days to find new dwelling. The landlord knew that my name was the only name on any checks they ever received for anything. And she knew that if I had told her I was moving out, she was no longer getting any rent. I was not on the lease, so I could not be held accountable for it. So she made a deal with me that if I was able to get everything out of that house and clean within 30 days, she would give me the security deposit because it was on my check. So I was able to get out of the apartment. I was able to get my security deposit back. And in 45 days after staying with a church friend who allowed me, my daughter, and later my dog stay with her for 45 days, I moved into my own rental townhouse with my daughter.
Wow, that is very, very that's heavy. That is heavy. But something you said in there I think is so profound. And I know sister you over there like trying to survive with your throat and coughing and stuff. But there's something you said so profound in there about what it was gonna look like, right? Here you are, a doctor, professional. You have these status or stature that the public is all looking at.
Mhm.
And, you know, as you've gone on this journey, I'm sure you've talked to other women. How many women have you come across that are struggling with those type of issues of staying in the situation because of what it's going to look like?
So I will say that the majority of women, 80 to 85%, will not be able to leave domestic violence situations because they are financially bonded to that person and that they no longer have the resources to leave. But there is a small but impactful population of African American professional women who stay in these situations, not because they don't have the finances, the resources, the education, the intelligence to leave, but we have this societal facade that has been basically thrown onto us that we've had to develop over time. We're not strong Black women all the time because we want to be. We're strong Black women because we have to be. It is a role that was placed on our backs, not ones that we openly took. And so I was stuck in that facade. I did not want to be a statistic. I worked very hard to be the first person in my family to have a degree outside of a bachelor's degree. And the first bachelor's degree from my family came from my mama. The second one, my grandfather. The third, my sister. So just having a bachelor's degree wasn't enough. I had to do something more. I had to give back to the community. That is what my mother taught me. I had to leave the house and always look pristine. I could not cry in public. I cannot show emotion in public. I cannot show inflection or tone that was indicative of the urban area that I was raised in because I had to be 10 times better, smarter, more well put together from a physical standpoint than my counterparts that were of a different race. That's how I was raised. That was inbred in me. And I tried my best to live up to that. And having this failed relationship from abuse, from a man who I never legally married, and I'm now a single mom, would have deterred the shield that I had to wear every day. And I didn't want to tarnish that shield. But something became much more important than that shield. And that was Reagan Elizabeth. And I teach her not to have a shield and be whoever she want to be. And do whatever she wants to do, and she doesn't have to put on airs or anything else for anybody else. Somebody hurt your feelings, you can cry. Explain to them why they hurt your feelings, but it's okay to have that emotion. It's okay to be different. It's okay to think outside of the norm and to do things that even mommy doesn't understand, because that's a generational curse that I truly want to end. As well as to show other women that they can leave and you can prevent yourself from being in these situations. And that even the mentor who helped you get through medical school, who gave you money when you couldn't move, is human too. that superwoman that they think they see every time I do a keynote, or I help them out of an educational problem, or what they think in their 20s is a life crisis, has also been through life crisis. But I've come out on the other end, but only because I've been honest with myself and to the people around me. And I'm okay with looking bad to society if it is for my well-being, because society don't pay my bills. They don't look at me in the mirror and tell me that I am wonderful. They don't support me and my child. I have myself, God, and friends and family for that. So the only people who truly matter are the people who sow and invest in me, not this iconic shadow that no one sees because society has developed this facade that they have for this first generation African-American woman from the urban area of Philadelphia, now living as an associate medical director for one of the largest managed care corporations in the country. I'm just Brooke. And people either like it or they don't. If they do, they're supposed to be in my life. If they don't, they're not. And I can live in that truth now because of this situation. I want to teach other people that they can live in that truth. And the reason why I decided to write the book was because 6 degrees of separation in medicine, especially when you're African American. And a really good friend of mine, Ann Soror, who I went to Xavier and medical school with, did her training in Chicago. And a story came on about this ER physician who was murdered by her ex-fiance in the ER. He not only killed her, he killed a security guard, a pharmacy student, and injured somebody else. In the same way, my mom called me when Katrina happened to say, "Oh my God, Brooke, I'm glad you graduated in 03 because that could have been you." She called me and said, "Mom," she said, "Baby, I realized that this ER physician could have been you." And I was like, "You're right." And I want to prevent that from anybody. Nobody should have to bury their child, man or woman, because men are abused as well. I had a middle school friend murdered by an ex, stabbed to death by her. He was a victim of domestic violence. You shouldn't have to bury your child for something that you could potentially prevent.
So, sister, do you have a question? Because I might ask another one if you don't. I know you do.
Of course I do. Of course I do. So, So first, thank you for all of that, because I think that as Black women, so many of us suffer from that idea of doing things right. I know that's something that I've suffered from for a long time, and I would imagine that before you had your daughter, you probably were one of those people who had to get married and had to do all these things in a specific order. So, but you mentioned that you all never got married. So you were telling us about what happened in the pre-show, which I'm sure is a part of your book. And your book is called Purple Tears. I Too Cry Purple Tears.
Yes, ma'am.
So tell us about this almost not quite wedding.
Well, it costs like a wedding. I had a facade like I was living. So God works in mysterious ways. And I called the wedding off. I had been shown divorce papers from him. They were notarized and everything. So I don't know.
Okay, so let's back up a second. He was supposedly divorced.
Yes. So when I met him, he was married. I was told he was separated. I found out later that he was not. But that is not what I knew going into it. I knew he was married. I knew he was legally separated. And everything about it showed me that. I had met his family, all that kind of stuff. So moving forward, we'd had my child, and I cannot be living with this man. We have this child and we are unwed. So there was a wedding that was planned. And before the first date, I was shown divorce papers, notarized and everything. So in my mind, he was divorced. And then the wedding was called off due to an incident in which the police had to be called. After a few months of what I thought was therapy and changing, we reconciled and put the wedding back on. And none of the bridesmaids who were supposed to be in the first wedding were even coming to this second one. They loved me enough to say that we cannot stand by and watch you do this. We do not agree. We love you. And if you want this to be a beautiful wedding, you might not want us there.
Mm-hmm.
So they were not. My sister and a best friend from high school were like, we'll do it for you. We got your back. So I received a text message a few days before this already paid for wedding. And it was that public records shows that he is still legally married. God saved my life because in the state of Florida, I had to have given him half. We were not married, so I could just leave, and what was mine, including my child.
Mm-hmm.
But I went through with the ceremony because it was already paid for. Whoever was coming had flew in town. And I got with the person who was marrying us, and I said, I've been lying to everybody. I've been lying to you. I cannot lie anymore, not in front of God. This is not a wedding. He is still married. I am not happy in this situation, and I do not believe I am going to continue in it. So this is going to be a christening for my daughter. I turned the rehearsal dinner into her first birthday party. And in the ceremony, he could not understand why we did not read vows, why we did not say I do, and why my sister was holding my daughter up like Circle of Life in the Lion King movie. And most of the words was us committing ourselves to this baby that my sister is holding up behind us in the Circle of Life, basically, because my sister knew. And I'm glad I did that because that date doesn't hold any negative feelings.
Mm-hmm.
I have beautiful pictures of me and my daughter. I have beautiful memories of my family celebrating my daughter at her first birthday and a reception where I danced with just my friends. So I don't have any bad memories from that day because I made it about my child.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's incredible. Y'all, folks, y'all been mighty quiet out here tonight. I know y'all have some questions, so y'all drop a question or two down in the comments, or just drop a comment. Let us know if you're picking up some of these gems that she's putting down. And you talked about being in your 20s. At such a vulnerable age for us, where we are starting to understand who we are as women, as young women, and there's so much that's happening in our lives, and to overcome all so much. You've overcome and you survived so much. I wanted to ask you about therapy and
Okay.
how therapy has helped you, and then we're going to talk about your get into the book launch and all that stuff in your organization. But tell us about how therapy has made a difference for you.
So
Because we don't talk enough about therapy, y'all.
We don't. And I would say that there is a stigma in the Black community about therapy and what that means. It means you are crazy. And we can pray our issues away. But mental health is health, no different than someone who has a chemical imbalance in their pancreas that causes for them to have insulin resistance and high blood sugars. There are chemical imbalances sometimes with certain hormones that our brain produces, and they can be induced by tragic, sad events in your life. So my first bout with therapy was when I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis my first year of medical school. And everyone told me that I would not be a doctor because this was a very debilitating disease that had a lot of emotional and physical components that stressful events were worse for. And medical school was very stressful, especially for this little Black girl from the hood. And I've always been a person that was motivated by people's doubt. And so I knew I had to do something. I had started having these panic attacks while I was in class because the mortality of my life was on the line. And the only thing I've ever wanted to do in life outside of being a Broadway actress was a physician. And I'd be daggone somebody tell me I couldn't do it because my body want to fight itself. So I started seeing therapy, and I was on antidepressants at that time to kind of break the panic attacks while I was going through chemotherapy for rheumatoid arthritis. And it worked. I was able to wean myself off that antidepressant with therapy, and it worked. So when I left this situation, I knew that I was going to need therapy again. And this wasn't the first abusive relationship I was in. I was engaged prior to him. And that particular relationship was more verbal abuse. And it ended with one physical instance. And that one instance at that time was enough for me to leave. But I did not have any children with this person. At the time, medical school was my priority, not being 33 and unmarried. So it was easier for me to leave. And I did after that one incident. But I had to find out why I was attracted to people who wanted to hurt me when they said that they loved me. It had to be something in me that was attracting these people. So I went to therapy to figure out what was it about me that attracted people like this. And that's when I realized that I was attracting people like what I saw, which was my father. So boys who, or girls, but mostly boys who have witnessed abuse in their house are 8 times more likely to become abusers. Abused victims are more likely to have come from abused homes. The same way we can learn to hate another race, sex, or gender identity, we can learn to attract what we're used to, which in those particular households are abuse. We are taught that that is love because that is the only love that we are witnessing in that moment. So children who come from abused situations, 9 times out of 10, without proper intervention, therapy, either become abusers or also become abused. Mm-hmm. It is not a generational curse. It is a worldwide curse because domestic violence happens all throughout the world.
Mm-hmm. It's a learned behavior, basically, because you're saying, and I'm not going to get into all that Dr. Alana stuff about those mirror neurons because we mirror what we see. Child, I'm not going to get into that. We do have a comment here, if I can pull it up. Let's see. Sure. It says, I am fortunate enough to have never have dealt with abuse, but have male family who abused their young girlfriends and hated that the women in my life would defend their sons. So I too recognize the signs secondhand. There's another comment here. It sounds like these men were jealous of her. It was, I guess it's supposed to be, it was them.
Yes, I agree. Yeah. I agree. The same way that my biological father was jealous of my mother. My mother was the breadwinner. My mother was the organized one. My mother was the one who finished college, despite them having my sister while they were in college. My mom was motivated. She was in the community. I knew about working the POLLS polls at a young age. Mm-hmm. I remember being 5 years old and my mom being like, oh, it's a Democrat. And I would run behind the machine and I would pull out the Democrat sign or pull out the Republican knob. So doing that kind of work was embedded in me. I watched my mom do it. And my mom was aesthetically beautiful. She was the kind of wife where if you were leaving the Sixers games late at night with your friends and y'all didn't want the party to end, that she would get up out of her bed and cook a whole spread of food for you and your friends. I had that mom. And everybody, hi baby, it's my daughter. I guess I've been away too long.
Yeah.
Right there. Thank you. And so a lot of people envied him because he had this community jewel as she was. But that's not how he treated her behind closed doors. Mm-hmm. And when I had first moved to Lake City, Florida, that was the first time I lived with my daughter's father. I was a bit of a community jewel. I was the only African-American kidney doctor in the town. As soon as I stepped foot, I realized what the healthcare disparities were. And I started doing soul food cooking classes for patients who had high blood pressure, diabetes, and kidney disease. I was going to different churches and hospitals and having these educational classes. I would spend all of my time at my clinic or my dialysis center educating, helping. Um, and I had become a community jewel. I had got the Martin Luther King Award for community service. I was always asked to speak on their local radio and TV shows. I was in their local paper regularly just because I was doing what God had asked for me to do. I wasn't in the town looking for the attention, but that attention intimidated him.
Mm-hmm.
And any chance he got, he beat me down verbally first, made me feel like I wasn't worthy or beautiful or smart or special. And that's typically the first instance of abuse in a relationship. It usually starts physically. Financial is usually the second part. He could not control me there. And then physical is after that, because if you can't break somebody down mentally, you then attempt to break them down physically.
Ooh, that's a word right there, honey. Now, the name of your book is I Too Cry Purple Tears. It is launching November 27th. So
Yes,
you all
ma'am.
be on the lookout for I Too Cry Purple Tears. Tell us about the book. You've told us a lot about it already in your conversation, but really what motivated you to write this book?
So after that ER doctor died, as a victim of domestic violence, I realized that there are all these untold stories that we don't tell because we're trying to live up to that facade. And I realized that God no longer wanted my story to be a secret. I needed to tell my story so that people can see that you can survive, that there are things you can see in someone to alert you to this person being dangerous to your well-being, be it mentally or physically. And my goal is to help somebody the way others attempted to help me. I too, meaning me also, because people have looked at me as this strong, independent, confident, sometimes cocky person who is a leader, and people can't tell me nothing. Not realizing that I can also become submissive and abused and feel unworthy of love or feel unpretty aesthetically. So I want them to know me too, and cry, because there were times where that was all I could do. All I could do was cry. And purple is the color designated for Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So me too. I cry those same purple tears that people think the cliche victim looks like. It is not a Lifetime movie. There are people who you revere, who you love, who gave birth to you, who were too crying purple tears, but wanted to live a facade so no one knew. And you don't understand why you're going through what you're going through when you learned it from somewhere. And you have to find out where you learned it, and you have to unbreak. You have to break those patterns, and they can be broken. And a lot of times it takes therapy to do so, because you can't fix a problem until you know what the problem is. And a lot of times therapy helps you figure out what that problem is. They don't tell you what's wrong. They just lead you down a path of self-reflection, self-awareness, so that you can figure out what the issue is, and then you fix it yourself. They're just a guide through the situation.
Yeah. Well, I know you are excited about this book. We dropped in the comments your IG. So if you're out there, go ahead and follow Purple Tears LLC on Instagram. You can also find Purple Tears LLC Facebook page. You can find it at both places, IG and Facebook. The book is going to be launching November 27th. But recently you did an event where you were a charitable event. You were collecting items for a domestic violence charity, as well as remembering your sister Dawn Mobley. So I wanted to talk a little bit about your sister because she transitioned earlier this year from, I think it was breast cancer. And this is Breast Cancer Awareness Month and Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So tell us about your sister Dawn and her fight against breast cancer.
So I am that cliche little sister who wanted to be just like her big sister. We were 12 years apart, so there was a large gap. So as a young kid, our relationship was weird. She was off to college and then she had her own life going on. But over time, that age gap became smaller and she became my best friend. Um, but she also battled with some domestic violence situations. And I watched her go through them and I attempted to help her through them as much as I could as a younger sister. And she survived it and she got herself out of that situation. And so she attempted to help me get out of my situation. And I didn't listen, but I'm okay. And she transitioned knowing that I was okay with not listening and that I was sorry for not listening. And she was very accepting of that. And she was not mad at me for not listening. But she was diagnosed with breast cancer during the beginning of COVID and had finished all of her surgeries and was now finishing up her chemotherapy. So technically she survived breast cancer, but during that journey, she was diagnosed with thymic cancer and stage 4 colon cancer. And her body just couldn't fight all three at the same time. And so she transitioned January 11th, 2022.
Well, I want to say, to the big sisters, I'm a big sister. So to the big sisters, we love our little sisters and we just want the best for y'all all the time. So I know that she wants the best for you and that she's probably excited to see you kind of continue this journey. And you were able to have these hard conversations. You told her about what was going to be in the book before she transitioned. So I know she's very proud. And
Thank you.
As a big sister, I know she's very proud.
And the clothing drives that I did were all throughout October, 3 different Saturdays at the same location in Tampa. I just had the last Saturday yesterday. And I collected gently worn and new clothes for all ages and sexes, as well as new hygiene products to be donated this week to 2 or 3 domestic violence organizations locally in the Tampa Bay and surrounding areas.
Yeah.
Speaking of that, how else can we drop your Facebook page, your Instagram, but how can people donate if they want to donate to your charitable, to your LLC?
So starting next month in November, which is next week, my website should be fully ready to go, and it will have an ability to donate. It will have resource links if you want to know your local organizations, how you can help locally, how you can help nationally, as well as if you want to help my organization specifically. I will say that my long-term 5-year goal for Purple Tears is I want to establish transitional homes, 3 to 5 townhomes in which they have their individual bathrooms, kitchens, and rooms, a resource center attached to these townhomes so that the victims of domestic violence with their families can have financial literacy, education, GED classes if necessary, college admission classes if necessary, financial aid classes, vocational classes, to not only transition them from a physical standpoint, but to transition them from a mental standpoint as well. Because the majority of victims are unable to leave because of finances. And so if we can help them not only get out of the situation, but help them change what their mental strength is, their financial strength is, then they will be able to go on and hopefully avoid any other situations like the one that they got out of, to help them long term, not just short term. So that's my 5-year goal for Purple Tears, to have transitional homes, not just in Tampa, but also in Philadelphia, to help victims of domestic violence and their families.
All
Well, I
right.
would say please keep us posted on that. That is something that um, I would love to be able to help out with as much as possible. The work that you're doing is so important here. If I know we're getting to time, but I just want to ask in closing, what's your advice to women if there's somebody who would watch this tonight or has a friend who's going through something? What is your advice to them to get out of these situations as quickly as possible, but as safely as possible?
So read the red flags. Red flags are just not in medicine. Stop signs are just not when driving. We have in this innate gut feeling in us that we ignore a lot of times as humans, that in this situation you should not ignore. Be honest with the people who love you and trust that they have your best interest at heart, and listen openly to advice, even if you don't agree.
Okay. I'm trying to write all those down, honey. Listen, because that's oh. So you said read the red flags, be honest with the people who love you.
Be open that they have your best interest at heart, and listen, even if you think you don't agree. But first and foremost, trust that intuition or gut feeling that you had. Because I had a gut feeling the entire time and I ignored it because all of my friends were getting married. They were in these long-term relationships with people who really loved them, or, so I thought and saw. And I knew that my time was quickly leaving me if I did not find a match who wanted to marry me and live what we thought was happily ever after.
Hmm. All right. Y'all
Wow.
heard it here. And follow your gut, listen to your gut. Um, yeah, that intuition, that little when those hairs stand up on your arms and on the back of your neck, all of that stuff. Pay attention. Like
And
you said,
pray.
don't and pray. All right, come on now. Pray, 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 pray.
Listen, there were things throughout this entire journey that were literally just God given help and blessings for me and my child.
Hmm.
And I got to a point where I was no longer fighting those blessings. I was open
Hmm.
to them, regardless of what it looked like. I lived with somebody for 45 days as a physician who should have financially been able to stand on her own. I had a family in Philadelphia who was like, come home, forget your job, bring our baby, and let's start over in Philly. And God allowed me to let my guard down and live with this family for 45 days while I got myself together mentally, physically, and financially to move into what turned out to be the biggest blessing for me.
Hmm.
This townhome that allowed me to stay in Tampa, where my career was able to truly flourish, to find a family, that's what I call them, my friends who are now family, who not only supported me, but loved my child as if she is their own.
Hmm.
Um, and gave me that sense of independence that I had lost being emotionally dependent of him.
Hmm. Hmm. That's powerful. Well, we have comments here. It says, this was so good. I'm glad I caught this show tonight. Glad you were able to tune in tonight, Nicole. Appreciate you. We have another comment here. It says, I pray you find your heart's desires in Jesus' name.
I pray that
Amen. We gonna
God give
claim
me what he wants for me. Too much
it.
time I've been trying to follow my own desires and it lead me down a dark alley. I
Yeah.
want God's will. Forget mine. Go on, give me what God want me to have.
Amen.
We got another comment here. It says, thank you for sharing this important message.
Hey,
And
Jackie.
yeah, and I love Jackie.
I
Miss
do
you, Jackie.
too.
Uh, we got some hands. Hey, hey, hands of praise for you. Sister, well, thank you for joining us tonight, Brooke. This has been fantastic. You said what you wanted to say in closing. Sister, what do you have to say in closing?
Yeah, again, thank you so much. My apologies for, I know on screen people will see me coughing the whole time. I just got some tea though, but thank you so much. This has been such an important and valuable conversation. And I know that you mentioned, being also a member of our beloved sorority. And
Yes,
I
ma'am.
hope in the future that we take on this issue of domestic violence um, in a big way, because there are so many young women. You talked about being in your 20s, and without getting into all the stuff that Dr. Alana has taught us about those are still very formative years, right? Before you even fully into yourself. And
Mhm.
so young women are losing their lives at such young ages.
High school. High
High school.
school. I
And
did
that
my pediatric rotation, and a 16-year-old was brought into the pediatric office by her 23-year-old older sister because her high school boyfriend punched her in the face.
Mhm.
right. And you mentioned, these number of young men, excuse me, who are seeing this behavior and they're mimicking it. So I hope we do a lot more in this space. So thank you so much.
Thank
Mhm.
you for allowing me to have the conversation. It is a conversation that needs to be had outside of October. While
Mhm.
it is not a disease that affects your organs, it requires the same attention, the same education, the same financial backing, and the same support as any other cancer or disease process that affects our community.
Absolutely, because it certainly is. It's a disease of the mind. It's a disease of the mind, and we have a lot of work to do there. So, to everyone who watched tonight, thank you so much. If you didn't catch this live and you watch it in the replay, if you catch it on the podcast platform, whether it's Spotify, what have you, make sure you share this with someone, because there are a lot of people who are silently suffering, and they have everything, like we said, looking good and pretty on the outside, and they're presenting well, but there's something going on, and you don't even know about. So I encourage you to share this with someone, because this episode right here will likely save somebody's life. And so, Christina and Brooke, we're gonna wave to the folks to say good night, everybody, and y'all hold the line while we